the lonely deserts of Arizona. A young woman named Scarlett Bennett was left with nothing, no inheritance, no home, no family to call her own. She thought her story had ended there, until she discovered something buried deep beneath the sand, a hidden mine, a secret that would change not just her fortune, but her entire destiny. What started as heartbreak became a story of resilience, redemption, and rediscovery. This is the true meaning of finding light when the world leaves you in the dark, because sometimes being left with nothing is where everything begins. But before we dive in, tell us, where are you watching from? We love seeing our global family in the comments. Let's get started. Scarlett had always been the quiet one in her family. Thoughtful, different. While her siblings chased degrees, careers, and the approval of their wealthy parents, Scarlett wandered sketching in tattered notebooks, collecting rocks, and talking about stars and soil as if they whispered secrets no one else could hear. Her parents didn't understand her. They said she was impractical, unstable, a dreamer. When her father passed, the will was clear and cold. Everything would go to her siblings. Scarlett, the stray sheep, received nothing. Not a dollar, not a word of comfort, just silence. She sat alone that night, clutching a coffee-stained letter her father had written years ago but never sent. Her hands trembled not from anger, but from the weight of being completely cast out by those who were supposed to love her most. That night, Scarlett slept on a borrowed couch in a friend's garage with a backpack, a sleeping bag, and the growing ache of abandonment. What she didn't know then, curled beneath that dusty roof, was that her story was only just beginning. Weeks passed like drifting clouds, slow, shapeless, and cold. Scarlett tried to move on, but the sting of rejection followed her everywhere. Every time she passed a family in the park or saw siblings laughing over coffee, a quiet ache bloomed inside her chest. She picked up odd jobs, cleaning, waitressing, even dog walking, but her spirit was heavy, and the world, it seemed, had no space for someone like her. Then, one rainy Tuesday afternoon, a call came from a small-town lawyer's office in Arizona. The voice on the other end sounded like he had almost forgotten why he was calling. "Miss Scarlett Bennett, you were listed as a secondary beneficiary of an estate. Nothing major, just a parcel of land. Desert plot, about 20 acres. Seems your great-uncle, Howard, left it to you before he passed. No one else wanted it." Scarlett blinked. "I didn't even know I had a great-uncle." The lawyer chuckled dryly. "Most don't. Real loner. Never married, bit of an eccentric, lived in the hills and talked to rocks, or so the locals said." Scarlett almost hung up. She didn't need more rejection, or more reminders that she came from a line of people who never quite fit in. But something in the back of her mind, maybe a whisper from that same part of her that once saw beauty in dirt and stone, told her to at least look. A week later, she was standing in the blistering Arizona sun, staring at a cracked metal gate that hung off its hinges. Beyond it, dry grass stretched for miles, peppered with thorny shrubs and scattered stones. The land looked like nothing, useless, forgotten, like her. The old cabin that sat in the middle of the property looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. The door creaked when she pushed it open, revealing dust-thick air, faded maps, yellowed journals, and one broken rocking chair facing the sunset. She stayed one night, just one, but the next morning, something pulled her outside. Maybe it was the silence, or the way the light hit a cluster of unusual rocks a few hundred feet from the cabin. She followed it like a trail, noticing how the ground seemed different here, softer, discolored. Her great-uncle had dug here, not deep, but enough to leave traces, and among the discarded piles of stone and broken tools, she found something curious. A chunk of rock, dense and heavy, with strange metallic veins running through it. Scarlett didn't know much, but she knew enough to feel it wasn't just pretty. She took it to a local geologist at the nearest university, mostly to satisfy her curiosity. The woman behind the desk barely glanced at it, until she did. Then her eyes widened. "Where did you find this?" she asked, her voice low. "Just on my land," Scarlett replied. Within days. The emails started. Then the phone calls. Experts, corporations, people with titles and numbers she couldn't pronounce, all saying the same thing, that what she had found could be part of a major undiscovered deposit. Rare earth minerals used in technology, satellites, electric cars, stuff buried so deep and so hidden that no one had ever bothered looking in that stretch of forgotten desert. Scarlett returned to the land. This time, not as a lost girl, but as a woman with purpose. She read her great-uncle's journals by candlelight, learning about the formations, the signs, the theories no one had ever believed. He had been mocked, ignored, much like her. But he'd been right. She hired a small team with the help of a local prospector who believed in her story. Drilling began slowly. The first few weeks were uneventful, just sand, rock, dust. But then the samples started changing. Higher concentrations, indicators of a significant vein. Then came the lab reports. The mineral deposit wasn't just real, it was massive. It had the potential to shift economic conversations about mining in North America. Scarlett stood alone one morning at sunrise, boots planted in the dry red earth, staring out over the ridge where her great-uncle's final notes had pointed. Her hands were dirty, her heart still bruised, but something inside her shifted. This land, this worthless, abandoned land, had been left to her by someone who saw her value, even in death. Someone who had lived the same life of isolation. And now, that land was about to change everything. She wasn't rich yet. Not officially. But the foundations were laid. Investors were calling. News outlets wanted interviews. And Scarlett. She just wanted to breathe. She wasn't ready to forgive her family. Not yet. But for the first time in her life, she felt like she didn't need them to be whole. What she found in that mine wasn't just wealth. It was a second chance. The land had begun whispering secrets Scarlett never expected to hear. Drilling continued for weeks, and every core sample that came up confirmed the same unbelievable truth. Beneath that forgotten stretch of Arizona desert was a deposit of rare earth minerals unlike anything discovered in the region before. Yttrium, neodymium, dysprosium elements with names most people couldn't pronounce, but were vital to everything from smartphones to defense technologies. Scarlett didn't have the education to understand all the reports that piled up on her old wooden table, but she didn't need to. The excitement in the scientists' voices, the offers flooding her inbox, the knock on her door from a representative of a major mining firm, it all said the same thing. She was sitting on a gold mine. Only it wasn't gold, it was rarer, more valuable, and more essential to the future than she had ever imagined. But then came the storm. Not the kind that brews in the sky, the kind that brews in people. One evening, just as dusk was painting the desert in orange and purple hues, a black SUV pulled up near the cabin. Scarlett stepped out, brushing dust from her jeans, and saw two figures emerge. One tall, one petite, both familiar. It was her mother and her oldest brother, Daniel. They hadn't spoken to her since the reading of the will. Not one text, not a single call. Scarlett's breath caught in her throat as they walked toward her, their designer clothes looking wildly out of place against the rugged terrain. "Scarlett," her mother said. Voice soft, rehearsed. We heard about the land. We thought it was time. Time for what Scarlett asked, crossing her arms. Time to pretend like I exist again. Daniel stepped forward, trying to smile. We didn't know. Scar. If Dad had told us. You didn't want to know, she snapped. You were happy to forget me. There was a pause. A long one. Her mother looked away, ashamed. It wasn't right. What happened? The will. We should have said something. You didn't deserve that. Scarlett's throat tightened, but she held her ground. The ache of abandonment rose in her chest, old and heavy, but behind it now was something new. Strength. You didn't think I deserved anything. And now that I have something, you show up? Daniel glanced back at the SUV. We were hoping we could talk. Maybe over dinner. Scarlett shook her head slowly. No, thank you. They left with polite smiles and unspoken guilt. And as the dust from their tires settled, Scarlett leaned against the rusted gate and exhaled a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. It wasn't anger that consumed her, it was clarity. That moment changed something. The mine had already begun shifting the course of her life. But now, Scarlett realized it wasn't just about wealth. It was about worth, the kind no one could give or take from her again. Days later, her story broke in the news. Desert woman discovers billion-dollar mine. From disinherited to millionaire, Scarlett Bennett's rise. Outcast heir unearths game-changing mineral find. Reporters called her a genius. Some called her lucky. Investors called her the future. But Scarlett didn't care about the titles. She turned down several high-pressure corporate offers that promised billions, but came with contracts thicker than her great-uncle's journals. She wanted control not just over the land, but over what it would mean. She reached out to small businesses, local contractors, environmental experts who knew how to extract resources without destroying everything around them. She made it clear this mine would not just be about profit. It would be about purpose. Scarlett established a trust in her great-uncle's name, aimed at funding education for rural geologists and young scientists from underrepresented communities, kids like her, who grew up with big dreams and no support. She also created a program that offered small grants to young people who had been disowned, abandoned, or aged out of foster care. It was called the Forgotten Fund, and in doing so, she became something her family never imagined. Not just wealthy, but powerful, purposeful, whole. That mine beneath the desert floor held more than rare minerals. It held the truth Scarlett had been searching for her entire life, that being different wasn't a weakness. That being left out didn't mean she had no place. That value doesn't come from inheritance, or approval, or bloodlines. It comes from knowing who you are and choosing to rise anyway. Scarlett had always carried her pain quietly, like a folded letter in the pocket of her heart, never opened, but always there. She didn't need revenge. She didn't need public apologies or dramatic reconciliations. But what she did need was peace. And for the first time in her life, she felt it. Not because she had made headlines or signed million-dollar development deals, but because she was no longer waiting for anyone else to validate her existence. The land had spoken, and Scarlett had listened, not just to the rocks or the soil, but to herself. And what she heard was no longer shame or longing. It was power. Calm, grounded power. But peace, it turned out, had a strange ripple effect. As the months passed, her family's approach shifted. At first, it had been subtle texts from her sister Bella, short and cautious. Hey, saw the article? Congrats. Do you think we could talk sometime? Scarlett didn't answer at first. She wasn't sure she trusted the intention. Were they sorry? Or just sorry they had misjudged her? Her brother Daniel emailed next longer, more personal. He wrote about their childhood, about how he remembered Scarlett collecting quartz stones behind their grandmother's house and showing them off like diamonds. "I used to laugh at you," he wrote. "But I think the truth is, I was jealous. You were never afraid to see magic in things." That one, she read twice. Scarlett didn't know how to respond, but she saved the email. Then, one afternoon, as the sun was dipping low and casting long golden shadows across her land, she heard tires crunching up the long dirt path again. This time, it wasn't a stranger. It was her younger cousin, Lily, barefoot, teary-eyed, holding an old Polaroid of the two of them as kids. Scarlett had forgotten it even existed. "I found this in Grandma's attic." Lily said, I wanted to say I'm sorry. I should have stood up for you when they pushed you away." Scarlett didn't say anything at first, just stared at the photograph, the two of them, muddy, grinning, covered in dust and sunlight. Then she reached out and pulled Lily into a hug that felt like home. It was the beginning of something, not a dramatic family reunion, not a perfect healing, but something real. Scarlett realized that people, like land, can change. What seems barren one season may bloom in the next. And just like the minerals hidden deep beneath the surface, sometimes the richest parts of a person are the ones no one bothered to dig for. Her family's rejection had once defined her. It had shaped her into someone who believed she had to earn love by being useful, by succeeding, by proving she wasn't a failure. But now she saw the truth. She had always been enough. The disinheritance hadn't broken her. It had set her free. She didn't owe anyone forgiveness, but she offered grace anyway, not because they deserved it, but because she did. And from that place of inner strength, Scarlett began using her influence to shift perspectives far beyond her family. She started hosting workshops on her land, inviting young women, especially those who had been abandoned or underestimated, to walk the same rocky trails she had once trudged alone. She shared her story not as a businesswoman, but as a survivor. Not as a success story, but as proof that being cast aside does not make you worthless. One night, during a stargazing event she had organized with a local youth shelter, a teenage girl named Maya asked her, "Do you ever wish your family had just loved you the way you were?" Scarlett looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Every day," she said softly. "But then I remember, if they had, I might never have come here. I might never have found this place. Or myself." That truth sat heavy in the air, but not in a painful way. It felt real, liberating. And Maya smiled. Scarlett's story began to circulate in deeper ways, not just in headlines, but in hearts. She was invited to speak at conferences, not about mining, but about identity, about resilience, about how some inherit wealth and others inherit wounds, and how both can be turned into something powerful. When asked if she would ever return home, Scarlett would shake her head. "This is home now, not because of the land, not even because of the mine, but because this is where I stopped chasing love and started choosing it." And so she stayed, building, planting, teaching, not just minerals from the earth, but seeds of self-worth in every person who stepped foot on her desert sanctuary. Her family continued to reach out, some more genuine than others. Scarlett never let them too close too quickly, but neither did she lock the door. The gate remained open, like the land that had once been abandoned but now teemed with life. She left space for others to grow if they chose to. In time, some did. Her mother came quietly one winter evening, asking for nothing but to sit on the old porch swing and watch the sunset. "I don't know how to say I'm sorry," she whispered. "You just did," Scarlett replied. They didn't talk much that night, but they didn't need to. The silence, for once, felt full. Scarlett had been cast out, deemed unworthy, forgotten. But in the desert, she had unearthed more than minerals. She had uncovered her voice, her strength, herself. And in doing so, she rewrote not only her own story, but the stories of everyone who'd ever been told they were too much, not enough, or simply wrong for this world. She had once been disinherited. Now, she was the one leaving a legacy. The mine had given Scarlett more than wealth. It had given her clarity. And with clarity came a question she hadn't dared to ask before. What now? She could have stopped there, retired in quiet comfort, sold the land for hundreds of millions, and disappeared into the luxury she'd never tasted. And for a time, that temptation whispered to her. She even visited a beachfront property once, guided by a realtor who smelled like expensive cologne and kept referring to her as Miss Bennett with rehearsed charm. But standing in the polished marble kitchen, overlooking waves that sparkled like diamonds, Scarlett felt nothing. No pulse, no pull, no fire. She realized then that her life had never been about what she could take, but what she could create. Back on her land, under the vast Arizona sky, Scarlett sat on the porch of her great-uncle's restored cabin and made a decision she wasn't going to be just a story of survival. She was going to be a force of change. It started small. She used part of her earnings to open a local geoscience education center named the Howard Institute, after the man who had unknowingly handed her the key to a new destiny. The center focused on training young people, especially girls, in sustainable mining, environmental ethics, and earth sciences. She hired professors who had been pushed out of universities for their unconventional thinking, and welcomed students who had been told they weren't smart enough. She made it a home for misfits, the kind of place she had needed when she was 16. Then came the letters. Scarlett had spoken at a women's summit in Phoenix, sharing her story in quiet, unpolished words that trembled when she mentioned her family, but steadied when she talked about the soil. Within a week, hundreds of emails poured in from people all over the country. I was disowned too. Thank you for showing that it's not the end. My father left me nothing because I married someone he didn't approve of. I cried through your whole speech. You made me believe there's something on the other side of heartbreak. Scarlett read every single message. She couldn't respond to all of them, but she began compiling them, cataloging stories of resilience, estrangement, and rebirth. And that's when the second idea was born. The Forgotten Fund became a national nonprofit within 6 months. It provided small grants and emergency housing for people who had been disinherited, kicked out, or abandoned by their families. Many were LGBTQ+ youth. Others were victims of religious rejection, financial abuse, or just generational cruelty. Scarlett staffed the foundation with counselors, lawyers, and advocates, most of whom had lived through similar pain. The mission was simple: you are not disposable. She worked tirelessly. Not to prove anything to her family, they no longer occupied space in the decision-making corners of her mind, but to amplify what she'd discovered in herself. That even when the world leaves you with nothing, you can still build something beautiful. And as she gave, something miraculous happened. The land gave back. A new geological survey revealed that the mineral deposit extended far beyond the original scope, deep into the untouched canyons neighboring her property. Scarlett had the chance to lease those regions. But instead of jumping at the offer, she paused. This time, she asked a bigger question: could mining coexist with nature with legacy? She brought together environmentalists and engineers, native land protectors and spiritual leaders. They sat at the same table, voices that had never been heard in the same room before. And she listened. And then she did something that shocked everyone. She declined the expansion. Instead, she funded a conservation corridor around her original site, dedicating 3,000 acres to research, preservation, and education. The mine would remain, but it would be contained, mined with integrity, managed with foresight. She told reporters, "Profit doesn't matter if we leave the earth emptier than we found it. I won't trade destruction for dollars." And suddenly, Scarlett wasn't just the woman with the miracle mine. She was a visionary. The transformation was undeniable. Scarlett, the girl who once slept on a friend's garage floor, now stood at the helm of a multi-million-dollar operation that had rewritten what success could look like. Not flashy, not ruthless, but intentional. Generous, rooted. She was featured in Forbes, but insisted on bringing 2 of her staff young women from the Forgotten Fund to the photo shoot. She turned down a luxury brand endorsement and instead partnered with a startup that made boots from recycled mining waste. She refused to sell out, and people noticed. Investors who had once laughed at her refusal to go big came back, this time with respect instead of arrogance. Community leaders reached out to collaborate. Universities who once ignored her emails now invited her to keynote. She didn't change her voice. She didn't dress in corporate armor. She remained scarlet dust on her boots, truth in her eyes, purpose in her every step. But perhaps the most powerful moment came on the 1-year anniversary of her discovery. She stood alone at the original dig site, the wind gently stirring the sand around her. She placed a single stone there, polished, engraved with the words, "You were never broken, only buried." And as the sun dipped below the horizon, she whispered something she hadn't said out loud in a very long time. "Thank you, Uncle Howard, for seeing me, for giving me a chance when no one else did." Scarlett knew this was only the beginning. She wasn't just rebuilding her life. She was building a new world for everyone who had ever been left with nothing and dared to believe they were still worth everything. Scarlett had come so far, from a girl cast out and forgotten, to a woman reshaping the very world that once left her behind. But the journey of healing isn't a straight road. Sometimes, the ghosts you think you've buried rise up in silence, asking to be felt one last time. It happened on a quiet Tuesday in early spring. Scarlett was at the Institute, giving a tour to a group of high school students from a foster care program. One of the girls, about 16, walked beside her with arms crossed tight and eyes that didn't blink much. Her name was Jenna, and she hadn't spoken a word the entire visit. At the end of the tour, Scarlett sat with the group on the back porch of the research center, where the sky stretched endlessly and the wind carried no judgment. She told them a piece of her story, not the press-friendly version, the real one. "I used to think being disowned meant I wasn't lovable," she said, her voice steady. "That maybe there was something wrong with me, something broken." The air went still. But I realized I wasn't broken. I was just unseen. And sometimes, being unseen gives you the space to become someone even you didn't expect. It was then that Jenna looked up, her eyes glassy, and whispered, "That's how I feel, all the time." Scarlett didn't respond with advice. She didn't offer solutions. She just reached out and took Jenna's hand. And for a moment, neither of them said anything. But in that silence, healing passed between them like breath. It was raw, real, and undeniably human. That night, Scarlett sat alone in the cabin, curled up in the same chair where her great-uncle once mapped the land in pencil and dreams. A fire crackled low beside her, and a single letter rested in her lap. She hadn't opened it in months. It was the one her father had written before he died, coffee-stained, creased, and full of everything he never said to her face. With trembling fingers, she peeled back the flap. Her hands shook not from fear, but from the weight of letting go. "Scarlett, I don't know if you'll ever read this, but I need to say it. I was wrong. I didn't understand you, and I didn't try. You scared me not because you were lost, but because you weren't. You didn't need us. And I didn't know how to love someone who didn't need approval to be whole. You were always the strongest of us. I just didn't see it in time." Tears fell, slow and quiet, onto the page. Scarlett pressed the letter to her chest, her heartbeat echoing against the paper like thunder. And in that moment, she didn't cry for the words she never heard. She cried because finally, they were there. And somehow, even if late, her father had given her the one thing she had always wanted: acknowledgement. The next morning, Scarlett did something she hadn't done since the mine was discovered. She hiked to the very first spot, the place where she found the strange, glimmering stone that started everything. The earth was different now. Roads had been paved, signs placed. But the spirit of the place remained. Wild, unapologetic, just like her. She dug a small hole beside a desert flower that had bloomed against all odds. And she buried the letter there. "You rest here now," she whispered, "right where everything changed." Then she stood, brushed the dirt from her hands, and smiled, not the forced smile of someone trying to look fine, but the quiet, knowing smile of someone who had finally come full circle. In the weeks that followed, Scarlett's transformation deepened. She began mentoring young adults, directly hosting fireside nights where people shared their wounds without shame. Her vulnerability became her greatest tool. And instead of hiding her past, she wore it like armor crafted from scar tissue and stardust. She wasn't trying to fix people. She was showing them that healing was possible. One night, Jenna returned. She had cut her hair, was carrying a notebook, and when Scarlett asked how she was doing, she answered, "Better, because now I know pain isn't permanent. And maybe I'm not broken either." Scarlett hugged her, tight, and cried again, not because of sadness, but because she could see it clearly. The girl who once needed love had become someone who gave it freely. There comes a moment in every story when the dust settles, when the noise fades, the headlines stop, and what's left is truth. For Scarlett, that moment came on a quiet summer evening. The sun was sinking low, casting amber light across the ridges of her land. The once barren hills were now home to something deeper than minerals or money. They were a sanctuary, a place where broken souls found roots and forgotten names found purpose again. She stood barefoot on the overlook, where it had all begun, the exact spot where she'd once held that strange stone in her hand, not knowing it would change the trajectory of her life. Behind her, the cabins were lit with soft golden lamps. Young people laughed and shared stories around fire pits. Students who had once been homeless now wore lab coats. Survivors who had been discarded were now building futures with their own hands. Scarlett watched it all unfold in quiet awe. This wasn't just about a mine anymore. It never had been. It was about what rises when everything else is stripped away, about the strength that emerges from silence, and the brilliance that can only be seen in the dark. A journalist once asked her in an interview, "What's your proudest accomplishment, becoming a millionaire, founding a non-profit, or transforming the mining industry?" Scarlett had smiled, looked out the window, and said softly, "None of that." "Then what?" is the reporter pressed. She answered without hesitation, "I didn't let bitterness win." And maybe that was the true miracle. Not the land, not the minerals, not even the redemption arc her family had tried to write for her after they saw what she'd become. No, The miracle was that Scarlett chose love anyway. She chose to give back when life had taken everything. She chose to open doors she had to break through alone. She chose to build instead of burn. Years later, a small plaque was mounted at the entrance of the Howard Institute. Visitors passed it every day, most without noticing. But for those who stopped to read, the words had a way of settling into their bones. You may not have been given a name, a place, or a voice, but that doesn't mean you can't build your own. In honor of all who began with nothing, Scarlett's story was no longer just hers. It belonged to every person who had been underestimated, every child who had been cast aside, every soul who had once believed they didn't matter until they proved to the world, and to themselves, that they always had. One evening, after a particularly moving seminar with a group of first-generation college students, Scarlett returned to the cabin alone. The wind was soft. The stars were coming out. She sat at the window, sipping tea, and opened a journal she kept hidden in the drawer, her truth journal. She called it. In it were letters she'd written over the years but never sent. Letters to her father, her mother, herself. On the final page, in her own trembling handwriting, she had written, "They left me with nothing, but in losing everything, I found myself, and now I am more than enough." Scarlett never sought revenge. She didn't need it. Because the greatest victory is not in proving people wrong, it's in proving yourself right. It's in waking up one morning and realizing you are no longer surviving. You're living. And so, under the same sky that once watched her cry in silence, she smiled. Free, whole, and finally home. Scarlett's story isn't just about a hidden mine. It's not about money or success or even proving people wrong. It's about what we do when we are told we don't belong. It's about what rises within us when the world turns its back and we're left with only our breath, our pain, and the fire quietly burning in our chest. Scarlett was disinherited by the very people who were supposed to love her, but instead of letting that define her, she let it refine her. She discovered that the greatest inheritance isn't land, or money, or even family legacy. It's knowing who you are. It's choosing to build something meaningful even if you have to do it with your bare hands and a broken heart. And most importantly, it's learning that you are never too far gone to begin again. The end. Up next, 2 more powerful stories are waiting for you. Click to keep walking the journey, and don't forget to hit subscribe if you believe that sometimes the deepest wounds lead to the most extraordinary awakenings.